Good morning, and thank you all for joining us once again for another installment of our Los Angeles County Economic Development Corporation's COVID-19 Economic Implications webinar series. As always, my name is Shane Cullen, and I am the Event Programs Manager for the LAEDC and will once again be your moderator this morning. We are joined today by LAEDC CEO Bill Allen and the Director of the LAEDC's Institute for Applied Economics, Shannon Sedgwick, who will provide insight into the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic has had on the region's economy. Now, without further ado, Bill Allen.
Thank you, Shane, and good morning, everyone. Welcome again to the seventh in our series of weekly webinars to inform you about the economic implications of the COVID-19 pandemic and the necessary public health orders designed to slow the spread of the virus here in Los Angeles County. Our presentation today from Shannon Sedgwick, the director of our LAEDC Institute for Applied Economics, will be on the impacts to our trade and logistics cluster of industries that include wholesale trade, transportation, warehousing, and more, as Shannon will tell you. This is, of course, a major cluster of economic activity in our region, accounting for hundreds of thousands of well-paying jobs in our county and supporting other major industry sectors, including manufacturing and retail trade. We're doing our best each week to give you insights into the different components of how our economy and how they've been impacted by the pandemic. And many of these numbers are quite daunting. They indicate severe financial harm has taken place not only across these sectors, but individually to enterprises that make up these sectors and clusters, and also to the workers who make up each of these enterprises. These workers are feeling acutely the impacts of reduced hours or dislocation from their employment. As we've mentioned to you before, more than 1 million of our neighbors here in LA County have already been displaced from their employment and filed initial unemployment claims. And those numbers continue to climb. Because these numbers can be frankly discouraging, I did want to start today by giving you all some good news. Because I trust that you've all acted like so many of our neighbors across the county, which is to say responsibly in adhering to the public health orders and guidelines for safe distancing as we stay at home to slow the spread of this virus. The rate at which new cases of COVID-19 in Los Angeles County are reported appears to have plateaued, even as testing has increased substantially across our county. And the average number of deaths reported each day has declined slightly. And even further, LA has avoided the surge in hospitalizations we were all so concerned about when we saw what was happening in New York and several other foreign countries. So you're doing a great job. Keep up the great work, even as we begin to open sectors of our economy. As a result of the way you've all been adhering to the orders, our county and state have begun initial moves into stage 2 of the safer at home orders, where certain businesses have been allowed to reopen while employing and adhering to important protocols to enhance the safety of their workers and their customers. This is giving most of us an appropriate sense of confidence and optimism that we're beginning to make our way towards the other side of this crisis. We've also seen a very positive second round of the SBA's Paycheck Protection Program for small businesses in the state of California. Our loan applicants from the state of California have received nearly $36 billion of the first $189 billion granted in the second round of the PPP program. That's nearly 19% of the dollars granted in the second round, despite our population representing only 12% of the nation's population. And firms in our state have also seen nearly 377,000 of their loans approved out of a total of 2.57 million loans approved in the second round so far. Through both rounds, small businesses in our state have seen loans approved exceeding $69 billion, or 13% of all the loans approved to date across the nation. And the dollars are beginning to flow to the businesses all across our state, such that we believe now more than $17 billion is in the hands of LA County small businesses whose loans were approved. This should have a very beneficial impact on helping get people back to work if and when their businesses are allowed to do so. Fortunately, our county has established a coronavirus economic resiliency task force, which meets tomorrow morning and every other Tuesday for the next several weeks to develop a plan and recommendations for short-term, medium-term, and long-term economic recovery in the county, including industry partnerships and policy considerations to spur economic growth policy at the local, state, and federal level. 13 working groups have been established to focus on broad industry clusters, including manufacturing, health and bioscience, restaurants, leisure and hospitality, film, entertainment, digital media and theme parks, arts and culture, commodities and goods movement, infrastructure development and construction, as well as foundations and faith-based organizations and small businesses and many more. My colleague Stephen Chung and I here at the LAEDC have been appointed to 2 of those working groups, and we will endeavor to provide your voice and wisdom to those working groups. So if you have thoughts you'd like to share, don't hesitate to reach out to Stephen or me at our names, bill.allen@laedc.org or stephen.chung@laedc.org, with ideas you may have, and we'll try and keep you all informed on the process and the progress of those groups. Tomorrow morning, I've been invited to give the task force a brief overview of the economic impact to our county's most affected industry clusters, occupations, and demographics to help set the context for the work of each of the 13 working groups. And we'll continue to support the county and this task force in the weeks ahead, as we always do. We've had a 40-year partnership with Los Angeles County that we value greatly, and we look forward to collaborating with them to not only reopen our businesses, but to help reinvent them. We continue to provide significant resources at our county community connectory, which can be found at laedc.org/coronavirus, and which has been visited more than 72,000 times in the last 2 months by people looking for resources for their small businesses, micro enterprises, community serving nonprofits, or even for themselves as individuals who may have been displaced from their own employment here in LA County. Last week, we added a section on reopening and recovery. We'll be populating that with the best ideas and programs coming out of federal government recovery task forces, our state's task force, the County of Los Angeles's Recovery and Resiliency Task Force, any of the task forces in our local 88 cities here in the county, as well as best practices or support suggestions from private industry. We all know that until consumer confidence is fully restored, most of our impacted industries will continue to struggle to fully recover from the effects of the pandemic. We are certainly encouraging our county's resiliency task force to think about how we can reinvent certain industries and enterprises to perform better during the recovery phase in the limited occupancy or role they'll be permitted as we accelerate the reopenings through each phase, but also to become more resilient, sustainable, and inclusive enterprises in the years ahead. We all know that until consumer confidence is fully restored, our industries will continue to struggle. And since they won't get back to full strength until that confidence is fully restored across the American consumer, we know that we must maintain attention to the development of successful therapeutics or vaccines to substantially reduce, if not eliminate, the health risk associated with the virus. And there is continuing good news on that front. There are important trials going on in hospitals here in Los Angeles. Grifols Pharmaceuticals, a major player here in our community, has arrangements with the US government in the area of convalescent plasma that are very exciting. This morning, Moderna announced the successful results of a small phase 1 clinical trial. As I understand it, it only had 8 participants, but all 8 who received the vaccine without significant side effects developed the desired immune response. That and the comments last night on 60 Minutes from Federal Reserve Chairman Jay Powell probably have a lot to do with the fact that the markets are up about 800 or 900 points this morning. There are many more vaccines and therapeutics in development, and there continue to be encouraging signs that drugs and vaccines will become available relatively soon. So I would just encourage us all, as we look towards this Memorial Day weekend, to continue to follow all the guidelines and protocols coming from our public health departments, who have only our best interests at heart, so that we can continue our economic recovery while reducing the incidence of people contracting the virus here in our county. If we can avoid a second set of stay-at-home orders later this summer or in the fall, it will substantially increase the chances of survival for many of the hundreds of thousands of small businesses impacted across Los Angeles County. So let's continue to do the work as individuals, as organizations, as neighbors in this region to successfully find our pathway to not just reopening, but reinvention, recovery, ultimately resilience and resurgence of this great Los Angeles County economy. With all that said, let me now introduce Shannon Sedgwick, the director of our LAEDC Institute for Applied Economics, to talk to us about one of the most important sectors in our economy, our trade and logistics sector, as well as providing some additional continuing insights on the economic impacts of the pandemic in our economy. Shannon, it's all yours.
Thank you, Bill. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining the LAEDC for these Monday morning updates on the economic implications of COVID-19. I hope that you and your families are continuing to stay safe and social distance through this health crisis. This marks the 9th week of the stay-at-home order, which has been extended as we move through stage 2 of the 5-stage reopening process. Last week, LA County beaches and trails opened. And as activity slowly starts to resume, it will help slow job loss moving forward. But a lot of damage has already been done when it comes to the economy. This week, Los Angeles County's reported cases of COVID-19 are moving towards 38,000 in the county. Our county share of all cases of COVID-19 in the state is hovering around 48%. The number of deaths here moved past 1,800 over the weekend, accounting for about 56% of all COVID-19 deaths in California. April labor force data for LA County will be released later this week. It will be the first full month to reflect the safer at home order and the closure of non-essential businesses, and we expect unemployment to spike precipitously based on what we're already seeing at the US level, which I shared with you last week, and with initial unemployment claims data, which measures emerging unemployment. So in the last 8 weeks, over 4 million filings for initial unemployment insurance benefits in California were reported. And between April 28th and May 9th, an additional 298,000 new PUA or Pandemic Unemployment Assistance claims have been processed. Between March 14th and May 2nd, the California EDD paid more than 1/3 of what was paid in benefits during the highest year of demand during the last recession, which was $22.9 billion in 2010. Today, we're going to focus in a bit on our local trade and logistics industry to identify some of the impacts related to COVID-19. Before the world began to grapple with the full human health and economic implications of the COVID-19 pandemic, there have been major movements in the global trade environment, including resolutions, in part or in full, to many frictions between major economies. Post-Brexit, the UK Parliament finally ratified a withdrawal from the European Union after 47 years of membership in December, with the law effective in January of this year. The UK and the EU now have until December 31st to negotiate the contours of their new relationship before the UK defaults to the WTO rules for trade. Closer to home, the USMCA was ratified by all 3 partners as of March 2020, and the new trade agreement will be effective as of July 1st this year. Finally, the US and China reached a so-called Phase 1 deal in January to begin to roll back trade tensions. The Trump administration achieved many of its policy goals with the deal, though no tariffs previously imposed were repealed. The COVID-19 pandemic has created new tensions between the US and China, so much remains to be seen how this bilateral relationship will evolve in the remainder of the year. Though there have been calls for the US administration to delay the implementation of the USMCA this summer, the deal is set to be the law of the land as of July. As such, it's worth looking at bilateral trade between our 2 trade partners and the Los Angeles Customs District. As the graph displays, bilateral trade value reached a relatively high point in 2018, followed by a decline in 2019, ascribable to ongoing uncertainty surrounding the outcome of the negotiations. Since trade data is so far only available for the first 3 months of 2020, The graph to the right compares the total value of bilateral trade between the LA Customs District and Canada and Mexico, respectively, in the first 3 months of this year and the first 3 months in 2019. As you can see, the total value of two-way trade, the sum of exports and imports, appears to have been on an upswing as of March. Though the pandemic had begun to hugely impact North America at that point, we might assume that without COVID-19, North American trade may have been moving in a strongly positive direction. As of April 24th, the U.S. Trade Representative notified Congress that Mexico and Canada had taken measures to live up to their commitments regarding the implementation of USMCA. As such, the presumption is that the agreement will become effective for all three partners as of July 1st. Therefore, it is worth considering some of the agreement's implications for exports and cross-border business in our region. Computers and electronics make up the majority of exports to both partners from the LA Customs District, all of which will come under the variety of extended intellectual property protections, including for designs stipulated by the treaty. This will also be true of the variety of services exports likely to follow these hardware exports. Southern California dairy and poultry farmers will have greater access to Canadian markets per the agreement, and agricultural chemicals, which are a key export class, especially from Imperial County and the Inland Empire, have additional IP protections. More automobiles and automobile parts now have 75% regional value content, RVC, requirements, which could have implications for our growing electric vehicle industry. And Hollywood and Silicon Beach will have the benefit of additional digital copyright and anti-piracy protections. At a glance, California stands to benefit from this next North American trade agreement, as it benefited greatly from NAFTA. But what about the coronavirus and its impact on employment in the industry? Most operations within the trade and logistics industry were classified as essential, remaining open during the safer at home order, but still, the longer-term effects of decreased consumption and decreases in global trade are putting jobs in the trade and logistics industry at risk. Wholesale trade and transportation and warehousing are both listed in the high-risk category. Let's see if they deserve to be there. Trade, transportation, and utilities lost over 3 million payroll jobs across the U.S. in April, representing close to 15% of all jobs lost between March and April. Across the nation, wholesale trade and retail trade have an unemployment rate of 17.1%, and the rate in transportation and utilities has reached 13.5%. As I mentioned, state and local numbers are released later this week, and we expect to see large job losses in the industry here in LA County as well. We can look at UI claims data for the state for additional clarity. Over 16% of the total labor force in the wholesale trade industry in California has filed an unemployment claim from mid-March to April 25th, and close to 14% of the labor force in transportation, warehousing, and utilities have filed a UI claim over the period. In the white paper published by the LAEDC Institute for Applied Economics, we created preliminary short-term estimates of what job loss could look like in May, according to major occupational groups based on industries identified as having the most risk of job loss during the economic disruption, along with the physical proximity required for workers across different occupations and the number of workers in each occupation. Reduced consumption and the likely closure of a significant number of businesses will decrease the demand for goods and result in decreased activity. Without the CARES Act, the number of jobs that could be lost in transportation and material moving occupations across all industries could reach over 100,000 jobs. The movement of goods occurs across multiple modes of transportation, with the majority of goods transported by truck. 64% of the volume of goods and close to 69% of the value of goods in the US are moved via truck. I'm going to briefly touch on how the various modes used in the local movement of goods are being impacted by the coronavirus. LA County is home to one of the largest port complexes in the world. The number of TEUs moved through the San Pedro Bay port complex dropped significantly in February as a result of the coronavirus outbreak in China and abroad. Volumes fell even lower in March as the pandemic spread globally. While the number of TEUs through the ports increased by 25% in April over that of March, volumes were still soft compared to last year, with the number of TEUs down by more than 11%. And longshore shifts are down from last year by 19% at the Port of LA. Moving forward, soft volumes are anticipated to continue as the domestic demand for goods remains reduced. We look at the cargo being moved through LAX. Domestic and international air cargo fell by 14% and 4% respectively in the first quarter of 2020. Canceled ship sailings and reduced flights, in conjunction with the disruption experienced by our trading partners and our own shutdown, have negatively impacted California's exports. The total value of exports in March was down close to 13% from the 2019 value. Looking at rail, year-to-date carloads for Union Pacific Railroad are down 10% from 2019. And intermodal containers and trailers have declined by 16% from 2019. International rail intermodal cargo fell 11.3% in the first quarter of 2020 as the pandemic spread around the globe, and 18.7% in March alone. And analysts expect even greater second quarter decline. In March, data from the American Transportation Institute revealed that as stay-at-home orders keep commuters indoors, trucks are moving at faster than average levels. In Los Angeles, truck speeds rarely reach 25 miles per hour at the intersection of the 710 and the 105 during peak commuting hours. These same trucks are now averaging 53 miles per hour. Commercial trucking has remained in high demand for those working with essential businesses, such as those moving medical equipment, PPE, and grocery goods. However, the closure of retail stores and manufacturing, especially in the auto industry, are behind the major declines in trucking. The trade and logistics industry, like many others, will feel the negative impact of the measures being taken to combat the coronavirus. And just like the others, as our economic activity resumes, the situation will become less severe. Next, Bill and I will be answering questions.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Shannon, and thank you, Bill. Shannon, the first question for you is, how or what would LA do to better measure trace logistics flows? And are there data sets in place that can be analyzed?
Sure. Well, logistics flows are fairly well measured by a combination of metrics. So the ports, LAX and USA Trade Online, which is a data product of the Census Bureau, they all provide relatively timely trade and logistics data. Caltrans also provides highway truck volume data, as does the U.S. Department of Transportation. So most of these sources present monthly data, but because of data release delays, we're still working with March data from most of these sources, which may only be capturing the first effects of COVID-19 on the U.S. and global trade flows. Excellent, thanks, Shannon.
Next one we do have is, are there downstream dependencies further inland that could clog the flow, e.g. warehouse distribution closures?
Though this may become an issue as businesses continue to close and households reduce spending due to unemployment, furloughs, or risk aversion, warehouse and distribution closures are likely to be a second order effect. The uptick in online consumer spending has generated a countervailing increase in demand for warehouse space to offset the decline in retail, restaurant, and hotel demand. So as such, industrial space demand has remained relatively stable.
Thank you. And then also, are we seeing signs of shifting supply chains? Are suppliers setting up shop in other countries away from China? And will USMCA truly drive manufacturers back to North America?
These trends aren't showing up in the data yet. There's some anecdotal indications of some reshoring efforts, especially as medical experts have indicate a resurgence of the virus that may happen in the fall. And also keep in mind that most of the tariffs levied against China through the duration of the trade conflict, they preceded the pandemic, and they're still in force. So the incentives are in place to shift supply chains either elsewhere in Asia or to repatriate supply chains here. So prior to the economic shutdowns, the USMCA was and is expected to be in place by July 1st. So all federal agencies in charge of supply chain management, regulation, and security have been expecting the agreement to come into force the middle of this summer.
And I think we have time for one, maybe two more questions. Our next question is, will this pandemic delay the port's 2023 start date for all trucks to be reduced emissions, near zero and or zero emissions? That would include the fees being levied on trucks.
Though a delay is possible, it's unlikely at this point. 2023 appears to be at the end, if not somewhat beyond the economic recovery period projected by most economic models. And the recent gains in reducing emissions due to stay-at-home orders may in fact cause policymakers to view zero emission and clean air initiatives at the ports and beyond as even more urgent.
Interesting. And then our last question for this morning. There's been a lot of talk of advancing the regional transportation network in preparation of the Olympics and the SB1 funds. Is there any insight on how the decrease in collected gas taxes will affect the transportation infrastructure projects?
Have you ever heard of an economist say, well, it depends? It's unclear if on net COVID-19 will cause a decrease in gas tax revenues. In the short terms, many haven't gotten into their cars since the beginning of this, so they're either working from home due to government mandates, or they're unemployed or furloughed. But however, there's some reason to believe that social distancing requirements and changes to personal preferences may actually increase the usage of individual vehicles versus public transportation. This will likely be especially true for leisure travel, as travelers avoid traveling by plane for their own vehicles. So we might therefore conclude that the gas tax may increase in the medium term as the economy reopens and people have these changed preferences. So it's difficult to say at this point, you know, if on net it's going to decrease for the rest of the year and moving forward.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Shannon. Thank you, Bill, as well, for presenting earlier and opening us up. Bill, before I close out, did you have any last minute thoughts you wanted to share?
Just two quick things. I put a chat response in the chat. Mickey Marafino asked if there's a retail task force or working group, and I said there's not a designated task force so far or working group under the County Resiliency Task Force on retail, but I know there are members of the retail industry on the large business task force, and there's also a small business task force, and I would imagine retailers will be represented on those and will be considered on those. I'm quite confident the county is well aware of the impact on the retail industry, and we will continue to make sure our retail industry is dealt with in those working groups. I also wanted to make sure you remind everybody that we're giving everybody the Memorial Day full holiday. We won't have a webinar next Monday. We're giving Shannon a weekend off, but we look forward 2 weeks from now to having everybody. So Shane, you may want to wrap up with that announcement.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Yes, as Bill said, we will be taking a break next week in observance of the Memorial Day holiday. So we do all ask that you all rejoin us for the next webinar, which will be on Monday, June 1st. So again, that's 2 Mondays from now. And please submit any questions you do have following up to this from this webinar or in preparation for the next one, you can submit to shane.cullen@laedc.org. That is listed on your screen. And we also encourage you to visit our LAEDC COVID-19 response page, which Bill spoke about earlier, for additional resources. And that web page is on the screen as well, laedc.org/coronavirus. Once again, thank you for joining us. We will be sending all relevant links out tomorrow, including a recording of this webinar, as well as registration for the June 1st webinar. Thank you again, and have a wonderful week and a happy Memorial Day weekend.
Thanks for joining us, everyone. Happy Memorial Day to you all.
Stay safe.